Welcome back to our Introduction to Max series. We're going to continue on. The last video I told you we just briefly covered the topic of copying objects. So let's go ahead and explore that a little bit more. I'm going to go in and let's make, what are we going to do here? Let's make a sphere. And I will just click this right here. And let's say that I want to make a copy of it. So like we talked about in the last video, one way to copy, is to hold shift and move our object on an axis. So we can do that and we get our clone options. We can also right click on it and go clone and we get our clone options. And as we saw, we have a couple of ways that we can clone an object. The two that I want to talk about, the two important ones that I want you to be first familiar with, I'm going to go ahead and hold shift and copy this over. That is our copy and instance. Okay, so a copy, I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And a copy is exactly that. It's a duplicate of this one. This one changes, this one doesn't. It's a copy. This can now become smaller. All kinds of things can happen to these two guys individually. Now, if I hold shift and copy this over like this and I choose instance, well, these two objects are basically the same. I can have different positions for it, but if I go in and make an adjustment like this, then they're both going to change, increase segments, whatever. I can move them individually, but if let's say I put a modifier on it, then they're both going to get the modifier. Okay, so anything that I do to it other than translating it, rotating it, or scaling it, anything that I do to affect the parameters of the sphere, of this object, of an instance object, they're going to be reflected in both instances. Now, let's say that I want to, I've made a change and now they're both the same size I want, but now I want this one to be unique from this one. I no longer want them to be instances. Then I can come over here to the button that is now highlighted. It says make unique, and now this guy is no longer an instance and it's no longer identical. Okay, so that's what an instances are useful for. Now the next thing I want to show you is this. I'm going to hold shift to make another copy here like this. I want to choose copy this time, but this time for number of copies I'm going to go ahead and put like 10. Okay, and I'm going to hit OK, but what I want you to watch is how far over I moved this sphere. And notice that how far I moved this one, the rest got moved the exact same. Okay, I'm going to hit undo. So if I go in this way, let's say they're just touching a little bit, and I go 10 again, then notice they're still just touching a little bit and they all go off in that direction. So it's another very useful thing to know when it comes to copying objects. Now I want to talk about something else that's off the subject of copying, but it's important to keeping your sanity when you use Max. I'm rolling my mouse right now, and as I can see, I can zoom in and zoom out, but I'm still rolling my mouse, and I'm not getting as close as I was. It's almost coming to a stop. Okay, and notice I'm even trying to move my view around, and nothing's working. We hit Z, which is the same thing as coming down here to our zoom extents tool. I'm just going to hit Z, and now it's kind of like freed it up. It unlocked it. So if that ever happens, you now know how to get out of that problem. Okay, I'm going to show you another, some more, let's just say some more things that are important about copying objects. I'm going to make a box. We'll say something like that. Okay, so if I wanted to make 4 walls here, I could hold shift and move this over and make a copy with just one copy. Okay, and now I want to make the other walls. I can make another one and then rotate the object. Okay, or I can hold shift and rotate, and it's going to copy. Okay, so now we're going to talk about, obviously this wall would be a perfect 90 degrees, and as we can see on the screen, it's showing us both here and down here what our current rotation is on the z-axis. And I'm going to try to get this to be perfectly 90, and it's not quite happening. Oh, there you go, finally. Okay, so I'm going to try to do a 45 degree now. 45, 44.95. So I mean, I might be able to pull it off, but as hard as it is, it's not really worth it. And that was luck. I don't think I've ever had it work out like that. But what I can do is, as we can see, this is rotating. This object is rotating in the hundredths of a percent. So negative 31.32. So that's in the hundredths percentile range. If I hit A on my keyboard, we see that up here the angle snap toggle turned on. So A is the hotkey for coming up here and hitting this guy. And now when I rotate, we see that it's rotating in fives, increments of fives, and this can be set to whatever you like. I'll right click, and we see here is the angle snap to every 5 degrees. So we can change that here if you want to. I think 5 is pretty good. So now if I wanted 90 degrees, I'll hold shift and I'll come down here and rotate on this axis, the z-axis, and 90 degrees done. So I hit OK, and I'll go to my move tool and move this over and move it over here and hold shift and come over here. Okay, so now we've got 4 walls. So we see that we can use our rotations to give us copied objects as well. So I'm going to make a tall cylinder here, and I'm going to rotate this guy flat down on its side. Let's go up 5. There we go. Okay, so we can use our rotate tool, and I can rotate this, let's say 45. And I'm going to give myself, let me see, so this is 1, so I'm going to say one more for another 45, because remember it's going to keep doing the change that we made. So I'm going to go another 45, so that'd be 90, so that's 2, and then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 should give us enough cylinders to fill this thing in. So we'll go ahead and say 7, hit OK, and bam, there we go. Now I'm going to hit undo, and I'll do it again, and this time I'm going to make them instances. So 7, hit OK, and I'm going to come over here and apply a bend modifier, and notice we play around with the angle. All of them, because they're instances, they're all going to get the bend, and we can also see that by the fact that they're bolded. And we can play around with the direction as well. So we'll say we'll leave it at 90, and then we can play around with this. So there's lots of really cool things that can be done once you start getting the understanding of what the tools are and how to use them. So this was just a cylinder that we instance copied 7 times, and we put the bend modifier in at one time, and now we can come in here and we got all kinds of cool things we can do with it. So we delete it, and now they all go back. So those are some basics, some basic principles of copying that are really important to know. I'm gonna come in here and let's go back to this guy, and I'm going to right click and center this to the world, and I can see a couple of things here. When I rotate, I can see that I'm rotating from this point, because if you remember when I created it right here in the perspective view, and so there is its pivot point. Okay, well, we can actually change where this pivot point is located, and to do that we're going to go to the third tab, which we haven't gone to yet. So I'm going to go to hierarchy, and we see the first thing we have here is affect pivot only under our pivot option, so we'll click on that. And what we're going to do is we're basically going to, we want this pivot point, which we can see it shows us in really blocky arrows, just to kind of key us in to the fact that we are adjusting pivot points at the moment. We see Z is pointing down, Y is up, and X is out. Okay, well, I want this to be, and I can, now that I'm in effect pivot only, when I rotate, I'm actually rotating the pivot point. And if I move, I'm actually moving the pivot point. Okay, and if I want it centered to the object, I can just come right here and say center to object. And now it's centered, and now I can either turn it off or I can just bounce out to any other tab, and it'll immediately kick us out. So now when I rotate, we see that it's rotating around this point. And if I go effect pivot, and let's say I move it over here, and again we can just come out, it's now going to rotate over there. So let's say I come over here and I rotate copy, do that 45 again, and we'll do another instance and another 7. Okay, so now we've modeled that kind of shape, and since they are all instances, I'm going to put the bin on, and notice what's happening this time with the bin. It's a little bit different, because this bin modifier, and we're going to talk about this a lot more later on, the bin modifier is based around the pivot point of the object as well. So as you can see, we can create very different shapes very quickly. And very easily, depending completely upon about the kind of object that we're using, where that pivot point is, how we are copying, how many did we make, are they instances. Okay, so we've got so many options available to us. Again, the rotations, movements, and scaling factors don't delineate through the rest of the objects, but how we manipulate the parameters of that object do get dispersed through the rest of the instances. So again, I just hope that you can see how many really cool options we have available to us when it comes to modeling. And these are just things that you've got to play with, you've got to get experience with, get in there and start messing around and see what we can come up with. And like I said, it's really easy to make some pretty cool shapes once we understand some of the basics. So again, I'm going to go ahead and just delete that cylinder, delete the bin modifier, and again we could come in here, and my graphics card is just freaking out on me a little bit. Okay, so those are some things to keep in mind when it comes to our objects and creating them. We see every object is going to have a pivot point to start, but that doesn't mean that it has to stay that way. I go effect pivot only, and I'm going to turn on my 3D snaps, and I can say snap to edge, and when I move this over, and that was a no-no right there. Trying to do that many changes in the perspective view. Let's go to the left view here. So we can, and that even that's why I'm not a big fan of snapping, unless it's very particular things. So if we wanted this box to tilt over, we'd have to move the pivot point over in order to get that kind of rotation. And then again, we could disperse that throughout the object and create, more shapes. I'm gonna undo. So those are some ways that we can copy objects once we've created them. And just real quick, we'll go ahead and I'm going to make another box. And just like our edible spline got converted, or a rectangle got converted to an edible spline, and we had vertex, segment, and spline sub-object modes, the same thing can happen to our box. So I'm going to right click, and what I recommend is that you always pick edible poly. Edible poly is a very powerful type of mesh. The modeling tools that it has is way more powerful than edit mesh or edit patch. So if we open up, we see that here we have more sub-objects. So we go into vertex and we'll go into wireframe here, and we can see that we select on our vertices. So those are our points in space, and we go to the next one, which is edge, which basically is so if we have one vertice right here, and we can move just that one, okay, an edge is always going to be a collection of two vertices, and we can rotate them and do all kinds of wonderful things. A border we're going to skip for now. A polygon, you'll see, is 4 vertices, a selection of 4 vertices. And then element will be the entire thing. So just like the spline, we had the door inside of it, I can hold shift, and now I've got, just go ahead and hit OK. Now this is my one box that has 2 elements, it has 2 boxes a part of it. I'll go ahead and hit delete, and we'll come back here. Okay, so if we go back into polygon mode, and I'm going to select on this polygon right here, and I'm going to hit delete. Now we have an opening here in the mesh. That is our border. That's what borders are good for. It quickly selects on any opening that we have. So let's say if I deleted this polygon and go to border and select, notice it picks all of those that are open. So we have the same kind of power when it comes to our splines as we do with our geometry. They all get broken down into these sub-components, or these sub-objects, that we can move, manipulate to get the kind of shapes that we would like to see from our objects that maybe we don't get with just the standard primitives. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and leave you on that note. So keep in mind, these are just some more things that we can play around with. And again, with our pivots, we can move these and go to my left view here, and I'll just move that guy right there, not even worrying about the snaps. And we can again, so there's 90, and I'll give myself, so 1, 2, 3, and I'll just go ahead and make them an instance. So that's how we can model things pretty easily. Just always kind of knowing, so you got to think when you are modeling, you see a shape maybe that you want to try to duplicate, look and see if you can break it down into a piece that can be copied or instance around by rotating or different things like that. And you should see that you're going to find that modeling's going to become easier and easier when you start to kind of see things broken down like that in your mind. And I'm just going to um, end with that. I think I got time for one more little quick one to show you. So I'm going to make a sphere, and I'm going to make another sphere, and we'll go ahead and talk about create geometry and compound objects. And since we've already kind of did this with the spline and the door, kind of showing you how the door cut a hole out of the wall, we can do the same thing here with our two actual pieces of geometry. So I'm going to move this guy right here to where it's actually touching this other sphere, and I'm going to pick on, I'll pick on the big one, and I'm under create geometry compound objects, and I'm going to come down here to Pro Boolean and hit start picking, and then pick the small one, and we see that the parameter subtraction got applied to our two different spheres here. If I go to modify and then open up Pro Boolean and go down to operands, we see I can click and select on this guy. Notice it's not visually in the scene, but if I click here, I can move that other operand, and we could animate this. We could do all kinds of things with it. I can scale it. I can rotate it, which obviously a sphere isn't going to make a big deal. But these are all things that could be animated. These are just some more powerful things that we could use when it comes to modeling. And it could also just be a really quick way of making the Death Star. And so let's say that this is kind of what we want. Then we can right click, convert to an editable poly, and now we don't have to worry about the Boolean anymore. There is not going to be this other sphere here. This is all now one object. We're going to get into that obviously a lot more as well. But again, just the basics of some more things we can do with our splines, and how we can use some modifiers to create shapes from them. And I'm gonna go ahead and leave you with that, and keep playing with it, and keep practicing. And I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.